Hi, everybody. It's Susan here, and I wanted to share with you some thoughts around the Mars and Neptune conjunction, which is happening pretty much on my Mercury. It will be tomorrow anyway. It's exact on the 29th of April, very early in the morning. And so for anyone in North and South America, it'll be on the 28th, which is Sunday, as I'm doing this video. And for everyone else from Europe and eastbound, it's going to be on the 29th. It doesn't really matter though, because it's really been in action. It's been in application for a few days and it will be all week long, pretty much. Even though Mars is going into Aries, 2, 3 days afterwards, yeah, 2 days afterwards. It's still going to be in application. It's a separating conjunction at that point. But keep in mind that these conjunctions are always the beginning of a cycle. Every now and then you hear people complaining, like with the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction that was recently all hyped up. Nothing happened on the day, or nothing happened on the 8th of April. These are the starting point of something. And if you're not understanding that, you're really missing a very important part of astrology. So what I'd like to show you is the cycle that comes with this conjunction. The conjunction is the beginning of something new. And as it's the beginning of something new, we can look around us and see what's actually quite active or important around this time, and see that those events are going to keep coming back again and again and again until the cycle closes. Now, with Mars, it's every 2 years roughly that it will encounter any planet, as it takes about 2 years to get through the zodiac. But this will be the last time in our lifetimes that we have Mars conjoining Neptune. So keep in mind that much of what we're experiencing in these, let's say, years, the next couple of years, is really, it's closing out a very big cycle, a cycle of Neptune, soon a cycle of Uranus as well. And we've recently closed out a big cycle of Pluto. It will be completed by the end of November of this year. So we're really in the phase of finishing up some very long-standing energy. Neptune has been in Pisces for the past 12 or more years, 13 years even. And so we're really at the last degree of Pisces in 2024, 2025, and until February of 2026. So a lot of what I'm saying here is going to spill over this last bit of Pisces energy, which is, especially with Neptune, is going to be an age or an era-defining energy, I feel. Now, with Mars and Neptune, it's very complicated energy. I'm going to start on the personal level. It can be depending on the individual's evolution, because of course it's not going to be the same for everyone. One of the frustrating things about doing these kinds of videos is that I really don't appreciate cookie cutter astrology. It's not as simple as A plus B equals C. It is always with reference to the natal chart. And you might be 19 or you might be 89. And so there will be a huge difference in the way that you cope with something like a Mars-Neptune transit. Or if you have it in your natal chart, it'll be different for each individual. So you have to take these things as a general archetypal reference and not anything that you can hang your hat on. And so please, in the comments, don't ask me, I have so-and-so at this particular point and what's going to happen in my life. It's just good astrology just doesn't work that way. So please, out of the respect for the craft, don't minimize these things down to one or two aspects and try and define your life based on these things. Think of it as an archetypal passage and try to intuit for yourself how this is influencing you. This is another, I think, really helpful way of using astrology, is that you start to internalize what these things mean to you rather than waiting for somebody else to, especially a total stranger on the internet, to tell you what these things mean in your life. So I'm just going to give you some information, then you can extrapolate that into your life, but especially in the Pisces area of your chart. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that anything at the 28 or 29 degree point of anywhere in your chart is going to be extremely powerfully affected all of 2024 and much of 2025. So that's kind of a given. Then we can go into the 0 degree points of just about anything in your chart. And that is also going to be an application particularly strongly in 2025 and 2026. But let's just start with 2024 and say that at the very least, if you have water, any water signs with the 28, 29 degree energy at this time with reference to Mars Neptune, you'll probably find this something that you can work with. It may be a little bit nebulous. It may be something that is not so clear, but it can be very uplifting. Now, that again depends on your chart. If it's something to do with Earth, that also can be very helpful. It depends whether, for example, it's Virgo, where you're getting an opposition, which requires a really strong adjustment, or is it Capricorn, for example, or Taurus, where you're getting a bit of a flow, a little bit of assistance, but you need to take action based on that. There's a number of other aspects throughout the year that are going to come back to this 28 and 29 degree point. And that's why I say that almost every single person, regardless, if you have something important in your chart around 28, 29 degrees of any sign, this is a big year for you because there's a lot of action around those late degrees of many, many signs. And so you're going to keep finding really important things coming up in your life. Whether that's challenging or easy, again, depends on your natal chart and the quality of the placements that you have there. So I'd be here all day if I went to break it all down. So on a personal level, keep that in mind. This is something that you want to start to understand a little bit about astrology. Don't just come back to one simple aspect of your chart and say, what does this mean to me? I don't know who you are. I don't know what the rest of your chart tells me, and so I can't really help you. So it's not because I want you to get a reading. It'd be lovely if you did, but I can perfectly manage to pay my rent without you. It's because good astrology really requires a look at every individual's entire chart. So let's leave it at that. So on a personal level, feeling tired or feeling a little bit unsure of what action to take is quite normal with Mars and Neptune, especially if it's in a conjunction or if it's in a square aspect or an opposition. But even by trine, there may be a certain feeling of I can't be bothered. It's not going to be a huge issue, but that's one manifestation. Another aspect of this, and this can be generalized to a certain extent, is that there can be a tendency to overdo things, to think that you can do more than you actually can, not really be clear on your boundaries in terms of what action is appropriate or what you might need to where you might need to stop. And that can include taking drugs and alcohol, for example. Do bear that in mind because these aspects will come up again through the week. And especially as the moon, which is currently in Capricorn, as I show you this chart, it just happens to be on the midheaven at the time that the Mars Neptune conjunction is exact. If we look at the UTC time, it's 5:17 in Greenwich Mean Time or UTC. And so that moon will then, by the late part of this week ahead, come to this point and it will sort of trigger this point of Neptune, Mars, and especially Moon Neptune is an aspect to look out for in terms of clarity, in terms of lacking clarity. But again, it's very individual. Don't worry about it. It's something that might happen. It's again one of these archetypal things. Another issue can be things that have to do with inflammatory illness or psychosomatic illness. So Neptune reflects what we can't really understand. Things that are coming, especially with Mars, in terms of inflammatory things or things that might be due to repressed emotions or some kind of perhaps inappropriate behavior. Again, if we look at the drug and alcohol abuse or other kinds of psychosomatic issues, that's something that can manifest in your chart. And again, it would depend on individuals. I don't want to say that that's a general thing. I'm just giving you the things that can be possible. When we look at Mars, Mars is all about action and how we might want to take action. And so it's confusing, or it's a feeling of not really being certain when Neptune is kind of clouding our judgment. But if we already have some clarity, and if we live life with clarity, and if we also have a very strong sort of spiritual anchor, then the Mars-Neptune can encourage behavior or some kind of action based on compassion and based on our spiritual beliefs. That would be the highest outcome. That would be the thing that you would want to be striving for. It's something that allows you to stand up for what is right. We see this very strongly this week, where we see all these students camping out and trying to get their universities to defund their whatever their administrations, or take their funding out of anything to do with Israeli, especially military industry, or any kind of military, or rather Israeli, or what they're calling Zionist investors. They want them to defund. And this worked. I have to say, I was one of those militants in the 1980s fighting against apartheid Africa, South Africa. It works. It works to protest. It works to ask for divestment. It works to scream from the rafters. And it actually, because we're looking at a situation here where we're talking now about the elite, we're no longer talking about the sort of unwashed masses that the media writes off very easily. We're looking at the elite, which can't really be ignored so much by the media. They're doing their best to propagandize, which, by the way, is also Mars-Neptune, especially war propaganda, military propaganda. And so they are calling them Hamas supporters and anti-Semites and all of the usual stuff. Of course, it's not true. And if you really watch the independent media and you watch what's coming directly from the universities, the narrative is extremely different. It's peaceful, it's loving, it's supportive. And the narrative that you get on corporate media or from government spokespeople is actually quite violent. And so this is where the Mars-Neptune becomes, that intersection, let's say, between the personal and the collective becomes really interesting, or even dangerous, because it's deceptive. Mars-Neptune can be deceptive. And Mars-Neptune also, think of all of the outer planets, Neptune and Uranus and Pluto, in the most malefic sense before you think of them as positive. It's really important to understand that these planets are tricky. They're not easy energy to work with, and especially because it's also collective energy. These are known as collective planets. The energy is part of what we have to experience collectively. And so we're not always dealing with what is only our stuff. And as a result of that, we're not always able to grapple so easily with what's going on. Whereas, for example, if we're dealing with the Sun and Venus, we have a very clear sense of what our relationship is to money and relationships and authority figures and our purpose and these kinds of things, hopefully. But with things like Neptune, that's mixed in our intentions and our hopes and aspirations, which is also Neptune, is the collective stuff as well. And so it's not so easy to navigate. So keep that in mind. So a lot of what you're hearing, a lot of what you might be seeing is not going to be very clear. And I think as we go through the next 2 years, you're going to see how these cycles pan out. I'm going to show you a few dates, and you can follow up with those dates and see how it all pans out. Just checking my notes here, because I do, as I mentioned, I've got Mars, Neptune on my Mercury, so God knows what's coming out of my mouth right now. Yes, so yeah, so again, higher level life, if we understand our purpose in life, if we're very clear in terms of what we want, then we'll act with a lot more compassion, a lot more of a sense of our spiritual purpose, and not be so aimless. Not everybody's in that situation. We can still have compassion for everyone nonetheless. So when we look at this collectively, and especially because Mars always and forever will represent military and all kinds of actions based on violence, especially when we bring it to the level of collective, That also will represent police, and especially because Mars and Saturn are in the same sign and they're still co-present for another couple of days. They were conjoining on the 10th of April. The student encampments settled on the 17th of April at 4 in the morning. I did a chart for that, but you can do one yourself if you want. New York City for Cornell University, 4 in the morning on the 17th of April. It's an interesting chart, and maybe I'll have a look at that later with you, because I compared it also to the Kent State massacre from 1970, which was a really interesting time where the police also became very violent with students who were actually very peaceful. And the propaganda around that was pretty awful as well. So let's come to that then, the collective aspect, which of course always including the Mars. And when we look at the collective, when we look at the mundane astrology, it's always going to be a little bit less positive and sometimes very much less positive than on an individual level. The Mars-Neptune is really about false flags. It's about military actions. It's about fascism. It's about confusion, and all kinds of, as I mentioned, media blackouts or propaganda or some kind of element of confusion that might be deliberate or otherwise. The fog of war is the Mars-Neptune term. And so fear mongering of all kinds, provocation based on fear, based on suggestion of hatred, which is again, mischaracterizing people's intentions is another Mars-Neptune fact. Migration and refugees and things that have to do with the consequences of war. We could describe, say, genocide, for example, as a Mars-Neptune aspect. Pisces, in fact, is also partly connected to these things like pandemics, genocides, refugee crises, and this kind of thing. So here we're having, in the last degree of Pisces over the next 2 years, we're having these aspects to Neptune that will constantly be calling in this quality of our times, unfortunately. So as I mentioned, these are just some thoughts. These are just some ideas. Don't freak out about Mars-Neptune. These aspects are coming up all the time, but it is a turning of a page, very much so, because we're starting a new cycle that holds this flavor of the Mars-Neptune Pisces aspect, conjunct in Pisces, last degree of the last sign of the zodiac. It's a very, very big feeling of something on the verge of something different that is beginning just now, has been the feeling that we've got through much of 2024 this spring already, but it does continue into 2025 and 2026. So before we go forward in time, I want to go backwards. I just want to show you the previous one, the previous conjunction, just to give you an idea of how that worked. That was on the 18th of May, 2022, so 2 years ago. And at that time, Mars and Neptune were at almost exactly 25 degrees of Pisces, so 2459, and it was in a semi-sextile exact to Saturn, which is pretty darn crazy. Saturn is really powerful in its own sign in Aquarius, and that's a quite intense aspect. Eris is in an almost exact semi-sextile, and so that means that Eris herself was in a sextile to Saturn. And then all of this is also in a relationship to Pluto. So these were times, of course, you'll remember, where there was quite a lot of activity around the war in Ukraine, which many people seem to have kind of forgotten about. Pluto was in a trine to the sun, and the aspect as well was in a square to the moon. Anything squaring the moon, especially malefics squaring the moon, suggests that there's real harm to the general public in terms of the aspect. And both Mars, Neptune, and the moon were ruled by Jupiter, and Jupiter itself was in the very beginning of Aries. So again, lots and lots of martial or really challenging energy here. Jupiter was in a sextile to a retrograde Mercury. Mercury is also shows up in a retrograde many times in these more challenging conjunctions where things are not that clear. Mercury's very strong itself. Retrograde planets are strong, and in its own sign, in the sign of Gemini. So there is a lot here that describes things that are confusing again about war situations. We have the Mars-Neptune is also in a sextile to the North Node, ruled by Venus, which is in Aries, where she is today, almost to the same degree, which is pretty uncanny. You'll see there's quite a lot of overlap in these charts when we look again and again. And I just want to give you an idea around that day. So on the day, and then around that time, the aspect of Marshall, the whole conflagration in Ukraine was really a big news item. The pandemic was still a big news item. I don't dare speak out about that, but it's just there's so many things that have been revealed in the last 2 years, certainly the last 4 years of the pandemic, where they were still talking about deaths from COVID. Now it's impossible to actually say that sentence without any trace of irony, because now it's very clear that the COVID itself was not nearly as deadly as it was made out to be, and that now we're grappling with issues around the forced medication of many people. And this has been the cycle that began in these 2 years, but it was also, there was a previous cycle that would have started in 2020. So I'm not going to go back in time too much because it just keeps going and going, but you can imagine it's still a Pisces cycle. Here we're looking at something that is actually really quite volatile, quite violent, really challenging energy with these squares and a lot of these overlapping semi-sextiles, which are really challenging aspects. Semi-sextiles are really worth using. If you are an astrologer, don't overlook them, especially when they are exact, like they are with these malefics, 3 malefics in semi-sextile to each other. You just don't get more grumpy than that. So that is something to really take note of. A semi-sextile is like when somebody's kind of too close to you on the bus. It's just really not comfortable. Or if you're driving and you've got a car in your blind spot, it's really uncomfortable energy. There's something rubbing up against you and you know that you need to do something about it, but you can't really confront it. It's just there and you've got to kind of figure out how to deal with it. And then we've got Eris in the mix as well. So it's just really ugly energy. Now, what was going on at that time is Finland and Sweden could think of nothing better to do than give up their neutral status and decide to apply to join NATO. Again, this Ukraine war is very much on the top of the agenda in this time, and it continues to this day. And now what we're finding at the beginning of this cycle is that Ukraine has now been tossed to one side, thrown under a bus, literally the day after the US government gave funding a few days ago. All of the same people who voted to fund the Ukraine war effort, where, by the way, most of that funding actually stays in the United States and goes to the military-industrial media complex. They have now turned around the next day, literally, and said, yeah, Ukraine doesn't stand a chance, which is something we literally have known for 3 years, but we've been told otherwise through the media. So we're now in a stage where we're at the end of this particular cycle. The other thing that changed that specific day, so this was the 18th of May, Finland and Sweden decided to join officially bid to join NATO, which was a done deal already. They've been working for years with NATO. It's not a surprise. And US then also opened or reopened its embassy in Kiev, which it had closed down a few months before as a diplomatic gesture, because this is part of diplomacy, is to withdraw, diplomats withdraw diplomatic ties as a way of protesting or of signaling their concern for safety. Anyway, so that was that from 2022. We're now at the end of that cycle. And before we move on, I want to hang on, that's the trine. We don't want that. We are going to go back to today. And so now we have that 2 years ago, the cycle from 2 years ago, we have now on the outside what's going on today. And you'll see that these cycles have so much overlap, they just keep calling in the subject until it kind of gets squeezed out. So here we're looking at now Mercury, which is now direct over the last couple of days, on top of the North Node, and that is on the Chiron of that previous cycle. And we have, remember, Venus was at 18 degrees, that's including that Venus. So Venus and Chiron with the Mercury North Node. Keep in mind that this is in Aries, therefore ruled by Mars, which is what we're talking about today. Venus is at 29 degrees, and there's again a semi-sextile. So Venus and Mars ruled Aries in a semi-sextile. Now, it's not as tight as the previous semi-sextiles, but it's important to take note of that. Venus is squaring the Pluto from the previous cycle, which is very significant because, again, we're talking about issues that have to do with money, that have to do with warfare. If we take the example of the voting on the funding for Ukraine and Israel, and what was the third one? Taiwan, and then the banning of TikTok, because let's throw that in there too, because this is about fascism, never mind democracy. I think we're done pretending that's true. This Venus in square to Pluto, and then the Neptune and Mars in a semi-sextile speaks quite a lot to that. So this bill is all about the money. The TikTok is all about keeping the situation in Gaza continuing. And although the claim is that it has something to do with China, and there's no evidence at all that that should be the case, as many of the owners of TikTok are not Chinese. In fact, China has an absolute minority stake in TikTok, and it's mostly owned by Singaporeans and American money. So we also have the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction still very much in orb, and that's on the North Node of the North Node of the previous cycle. So we're seeing that whatever was going on around that Jupiter-Uranus, so a week ago, which was basically voting that bill in, especially in the US Congress. And I mentioned that especially because it does affect global situations. And we're seeing that that's coming back to the place where the North Node was, that cycle that was so important 2 years ago. Is being highlighted right now, and to see how we're kind of coming to new insights, new understanding, because the insight is that one of the keywords for that Jupiter-Uranus. What else have we got? So the moon as well, that's another thing. So the aspect of Neptune. So thinking about that, Uranus and Jupiter, Neptune with Mars is squaring the moon from the previous cycle, as the other cycle did as well. So we're still looking at this tension between what the public wants and what is wanted by what we could describe as the military-industrial complex. And then the sun itself at this particular time is in a trine to the moon here. I forgot to mention that, and that's very interesting too, because it does show that corporate aspect of Capricorn, where with the financial interests of the sun, the leaders, is actually part of this bigger story. So keep all these things in mind as we go forward. And also, just to briefly mention again, the Eris is still at the same point, simply because Eris just goes so slowly. So Eris is a really big part of this this passage as we go through these 2 years. So let's carry on. I'm going to move this now. And sorry. Oh, I think somebody's at the door. Hang on, I'm just going to pause. Okay, sorry about that. My neighbor came by. I'm surrounded by retired people, so they forget what it's like to work. And it makes me feel like a workaholic. Anyway, so where was I? We were talking now about this new cycle, and I want to just now move ahead. So we were looking at the previous 2-year cycle and how it's resonating with now. And now we're going to look ahead. So I'm going to add a layer of this as we go forward. We're now going to move towards the next event, which will be in August. So then we have, sorry, not in August, it's going to be in September. So at the Virgo new moon, we're going to have Mars in a square to this to Neptune. So that's what we call the opening square. Now, before I'm skipping the sextiles because it's just too much. Otherwise, we just go on forever. But I will do the trines, but I'm not going to look at the sextiles. But the opening square is always very interesting because it will show the tension that is needing to be redressed, or the way that things need to be resolved based on what happened now, in this case, on the 29th of April or thereabouts. And as we're talking about a new cycle, it's from this point onwards. Now, this is a really interesting new moon. The Virgo new moon is on the 3rd of September at 2:55 a.m. UTC. And that is where Saturn will be retrograding back to where Saturn is now, to within 3 arc minutes of a degree at that particular time. So basically from that point, now we've got Pluto now moving back into Capricorn. So keep this in mind. Also bear in mind that the at 29 degrees and 30 arc minutes of Capricorn is where the US progressed Pluto is. So keep this in mind, because that is the big story for September, October, November, if not before and after, even if the natal US Pluto is at 27. So this is still very much the Pluto return for the US. Either way, it is. So all of what we're seeing here at these later degrees always will be triggering that late degree US Pluto, and showing up how these things are going to be affecting the country itself. Keep in mind that their elections are happening when Pluto is at that late degree of Capricorn. So the 3rd of September, we have then Neptune coming back. Now it's at 29 degrees even. And at this particular new moon, Mars itself is at 28:56. So it's only a couple of hours after the new moon that Mars is exactly going to be squaring Neptune. And so effectively, it's already in orb. And that's even more important, because when something like a lunation happens, it is going to tell us a lot about what's referring back to the original sequence of events. And keep in mind, as I said, we had that moon in Capricorn trining the sun in Taurus, bringing in the corporate understanding, or the corporate or the authorities. We could say, even in the case of the university administrations, for example, these are aspects that are really highlighted here. At uppermost in the public's mind, you could say, and then based on the rulers and their desires with regards to finances. Now, you can also put that in terms of your personal experience and see where that lands in your natal chart. But then we get this 11-degree Virgo moon, and that's creating a trine, a grand Earth trine to these prior lunations. So these are not full lunations, but this is the opening, what do you call that? The balsamic moon phase. So, or the closing, it's the waning moon phase. And so here what we're looking at is a new moon happening at the same time as the opening square of Mars. And that's really significant, because these are really very rare degree points. They're very special, triggering something that has great meaning for us collectively. So 3rd of September, that early part of September, is going to be a really significant time. Only a couple of weeks before that, we have the exact square between Saturn and Jupiter, and that's already quite a significant thing, and I'll do a separate video about that. Nothing to worry about. I'm born with that exact configuration, so don't stress too much about it, but it does require adjustment. It does require a certain amount of finesse to understand how to work with that energy. And then when we combine that with the square from Mars to Neptune, it's going to be tricky days. So the beginning of September, tricky days indeed, and all based on what we're experiencing starting now. That's an ongoing story. What else have we got here? We've got Venus at that time, which is in a trine to Pluto. And then Venus will be also in a trine to, no, sorry, not at all. So let's leave Venus alone for now, but she'll be in a trine to the Pluto of that earlier transit, or the 29th of April conjunction. What else have we got here? Yes, and here's the interesting thing as well. At this point, we have Pluto in late degrees of Capricorn, which is now forming a grand, or rather an Earth trine to Uranus, which is now retrograde. It only gets up to that 27-degree point in 2024. But that's a really interesting configuration, because at the same time, Neptune is also in the last degree of Pisces. So we have a very strong sextile between Pluto and Neptune, which is ongoing for a century or more, not so extraordinary. But now we're adding this both trine and sextile with Uranus. And so we have the three outer planets in this really unusual configuration. And this starts a whole new energy in and of itself, which is a very interesting opportunity, I think, for some very very novel cycle. You know, this is once in a lifetime stuff. It's kind of uncharted territory, very difficult to assess on a collective level. On an individual level, we would have to see how they relate to the natal chart, but nonetheless, it's going to be very, very different days for us. Just the Neptune transit through Pisces alone is very significant, because it will never happen again in our lifetime. So none of them will. None of these transits will. But the Neptune Mars story in Pisces is done for this lifetime. Now we want to go ahead. Let me just double check my little dates so I don't. Yes. So then we have on the 31st of October. And I hope I've got this up here. Yeah, it's before, in fact, the 28th of October. On the 31st, we have Mars exactly opposing Pluto, but on the 28th, we have the exact trine now between Mars and Neptune. So a couple of days later, Mars is exactly opposing Pluto, which again is a stressful aspect. It happens 3 times. It'll happen again at the beginning of December. That's another, that'll be another video. And then again in the new year. So that those stressful oppositions between Mars and Pluto are also going to be a part of what we're experiencing now in this conjunction. This will be part of the cycle that we're in. So we're looking at something quite tense. And again, it's the end of a story. It's the end of a really long 15-year journey of Pluto going through Capricorn, which has torn apart the fabric of what we understand to be good governance, insofar as it ever was, and also what I would describe as international law and treaties. And we have seen that is a complete fiction. And this, perhaps, I think, if I had to give a label to this particular conjunction of Mars-Neptune, I would say this is literally the end of the illusion of international law as we understand it. And so we can see this it's going to be transpiring in different layers. It will be certainly the end of different aspects of the UN and other such agreements that seem to be what we refer to when we are looking for some kind of sanity in the collective. So this Mars in trine to Neptune now. Neptune itself is retrograde, so it's moving back away from this point that it was in. Now Saturn is at the point of it's close to its station. Saturn itself will be stationing direct at that 12-degree point. It's a little bit after this, a couple of days after, and or beginning of November. So yeah, a few days after. So that's again part of the story, because Saturn at this point is also really, really slow. It means that when the planets slow down to retrograde or slow down to station direct, they're very, very powerful. And so here again, we have a really powerful story that still includes this Saturn. And Saturn is even more important at this point in the tail in these few years, because Saturn is ruling that Pluto, whether it's in Aquarius or in Capricorn. So we always want to know what Saturn is up to. Jupiter is retrograde itself. It had gone up to 21 degrees and turns around, and Jupiter is now in a sextile to both the Chiron of the 29th conjunction, 29th of April conjunction, as well as Chiron, which is now coming back to the degree of the point at which it is on the 29th. So on the 28th of October, Chiron comes back exactly to where it is as I'm speaking to you now. These are really interesting coincidences. They do tell us a lot about the quality of what we're about to experience. Mars is in Cancer, which is incidentally affecting the US eighth house, where we have, the US Jupiter, the Sun, and so on. I think Mars is in very strong orb of conjunction of the US Jupiter. Chiron is always describing a story of some kind of pain or need for healing, need for deeper understanding. Jupiter itself in Gemini is also going to be something to do with commerce. It's going to be with regards to these international agreements. Jupiter is ruling the conjunction, remember, at the end of Pisces, and continues to rule the Saturn and Neptune as long as they're still in Pisces. Jupiter, of course, also in Gemini rules communications of all kinds. And I will be doing a separate video about that. You'll get that on Wednesday, which I think might be the 1st of May. I can't even believe it's that late. And so here we have now the moon in a square to that Jupiter, and the moon itself is, no, it's not. I thought it was going to be in a trine to Pluto, but that's too broad. I'm not going to give it. Enough is enough. And so the moon it is indeed in trine to the Jupiter and Uranus, and especially to the conjunction, that point that we had, but still to the Uranus. And I will give it to the Uranus, so the trine to Uranus as it's retrograding back to that point. What else is the moon doing? I think that's enough. If you spot more things, let me know in the comments. Now, we're not quite done, so we're going to carry on because we want to go now to next year in February. And that's going to be an interesting time. Oh, wait, before we get there, we have to do the Mars retrograding back. Now, again, remember that Mars earlier in January, will have been in opposition to Pluto. So that will be the 3rd time. Now Mars is retrograding back to that point where it's trining the Uranus, which is now direct. The difference here is, and it's quite a massive difference, that we have Pluto back coming into the place where Pluto has been through most of 2024. But also we now have Venus and Saturn, along with Neptune and the North Node now in the sign of Pisces, where prior to that, the North Node had been in Mars-ruled Aries all this time. And the North Node is now coming to Neptune. And I will show you in February how that just piles up onto this conjunction in so many ways. It's just extraordinary. So again, we have Uranus, which is now coming to the degree at which it's going to be stationing direct. So Uranus is very much part of this story, this ongoing story that is partly involving this conjunction in Mars-Neptune in Pisces, but also very much part of the extended story of not only the eclipse that we just had on the 8th of April, but also the 20th and 21st of April conjunction of Uranus and Jupiter. And we have Chiron coming back now to the eclipse point, where it's been kind of lingering anyway over the past year. And it's really, again, questioning, have we learned something? Have we healed from something? Have we got this? Now, the moon even comes along in this particular chart. The IC and the MC are still affected by lunations. This time the moon is now in Cancer, very strong dignity for the moon. The moon is in an exact sextile to the sun. We're talking about the 12th of January 2025 compared to the 29th of April 2024. And that is in opposition to within a degree of the moon of the year before almost. So we're really looking at a lot of things tying in. It's going to change depending on your particular chart, depending on the different points that are activated. But the bigger cycle just keeps pulling in the information month by month by month, responding to the question of what is the new cycle of Mars and Neptune all about. And it just keeps telling you, it's showing you all of these different ways that it keeps pulling in the same bigger, slower moving planets that give you a picture. So if you're looking at this from your personal story, you want to keep these dates in mind. You want to go back over what's going on now at the end of April, all through April, because April, I mean, honestly, just about every day was significant. May is similarly significant. And then go into August, go into September, go into the later part of the year as the planets keep turning around, slowing down and coming back to these same places and asking the same questions with some new information. So you'll get better answers the second or third time around. And now we're into January. This is 2025 now. And then the next chart that we're going to be looking at, it's no longer on my list because I've been looking at so many charts. I just have to go and find it now. And it's a doozy. So we have the February, where is it? I hope I saved it. So Mars. I guess I did not, so I'm going to have to make a new one. So I'll do that with you now. Sorry about that. Thought I did. Apparently not. So I just didn't save it. All right, let's have a look forward. So I'm going to do this in this way. We take the current transits and we're going to go then to February. So we just jump ahead. We're going to go to January. So we want to go till the 2nd of February. It's actually going to be that whole week, basically, between the 2nd of February and the 9th of January. But look at this. This is quite insane. We have Venus, the North Node, and Neptune all together at that point of the Mars and Neptune conjunction. Mars itself is coming back to square the point of the 8th of April eclipse, which is still where we find Chiron, almost to the arc minute of exact degree. So here we have the Chiron of the 20 of today, as I'm speaking to you, Chiron at 20 degrees and 35 of Aries. And here it's coming back to 19 and 33. And remember that the eclipse degrees were at 19 degrees and 24 minutes of Aries. So there's going to be such a lot of things that we need to keep in mind as we go forward collectively to try and really understand how this new cycle is changing us based on these things that we're already being told right now. Keep your notepads handy. And so let me go back a day because it gets even more fun, because actually only just before we get the moon moving into Aries, of course, the moon has to get in on the action. I didn't put that up there because it's not all happening at 28, but the moon at 27 bumps into Neptune and then Venus and then the North Node. I mean, why not, really? And so I'm going to just push this forward a few days so you can see that it just keeps lasting and lasting. The moon is now moving into the Aries, sign of Aries, but it does keep going really right through till the, what are we looking at, 9th, even, yeah, into the middle of February, till February, middle of February, even beyond. Yeah, so this is really extraordinary. It's an unusual, very powerful time that we're in. So I won't go too much deeper into all of that. And look at this, Mars just keeps hanging around. Mars is at the 17-degree point of Cancer, which is in fact the degree point at which it's turning around to station direct at this point, and that is in a trine to both the Saturn of the 29th of April and the Saturn that is actually transiting in February of 2025. So what else can I pull in there? And of course, then we've got Uranus all through the month of February, essentially back at the point where we have the Uranus and Jupiter conjunction. Remember, Uranus doesn't get any farther than the 23rd degree. It'll clear out of Taurus from that point on in 2025. It clears back out of Taurus into Gemini in 2025, then zips back in, and then again in 2026, it's finally done. Oof. So I think that's all I wanted to say. If I keep going, we start to talk then about the Neptune and Saturn, and honestly, that deserves its own video, but I just wanted to point out how these cycles work. It's not just a one-off thing. It's not something that happens kind of once only, and come back to just me now. Things that happen like this, these bigger cycles, they really affect us for a long time. I'm not even, did I show you the opposition? I'm not even sure I did. No, I'm going to go back. Sorry, let's just check this one more time. This is really worth doing. Okay, let me just show you this opposition, folks, because this is really exciting. Before I go to bed, basically, because it's been quite the day. As I mentioned in the beginning, I have Mars and Neptune on my Mercury, and I've really not been able to accomplish any of the things that I set out to accomplish at all today. So there's a great way of looking at it. So here we go. Mars in opposition now to Neptune, just to wrap this up. It's already gone way longer than I had hoped. At this point now, Mars is opposite Neptune. This is the halfway point of the cycle. I'm not going through the whole cycle. It's just pointless to go that far ahead because who knows what's coming down the pipeline. But Mars is, of course, not just opposing Neptune. This does indeed, and there we go, I have to pull in the Saturn-Neptune cycle. So it's part of this bigger cycle this time around. It doesn't usually affect us this way, but the Saturn-Neptune cycle coming just into the first degree of Aries. So now we can say 2024, the last degrees of all signs, it's going to be something really, really uncanny for many, many people. Then 2025 and 2026, it's the first couple of degrees of all of the signs that are really whacked. And in fact, because Pluto is already in the beginning of Aquarius, let's face it, that also applies in 2024. So let's just give it for the next couple of years, everybody at the last degrees of any sign and the beginning degrees of any sign is going to have your little boat rocked. So again, would have to be something I would see in your natal chart to tell you how that's going to look, but expect a lot of change and going in a completely different direction. As this Mars is ruling this conjunction of Saturn and Neptune, the halfway point of this cycle is really significant. So we can certainly expect big things. Remember, we're talking about August of 2025. It's way too far ahead to even begin to imagine what this could look like, because as you can see just by looking out the window, this is a crazy world we live in. Things are simply not as they appear. That's the least I can say with any kind of confirmation. And we don't know how these things are going to evolve. So of course that Mars now in Libra is trining Pluto, which is a big game changer. And of course, it's also trining. So it's a grand trine, again, a malefic grand trine, Mars, Pluto, and Uranus, which is also creating a minor, that's a sextile to the Neptune and Saturn, both between the Pluto and the Uranus at the same time. So this is an extraordinary pattern. It's called a kite, and Mars is the big story of this particular kite. So honestly, I think that's just too much to try and break down at this point, because my little Mars-Neptune addled Mercury will never be able to make sense of it. I'm not sure I'm making sense even as we speak. Perhaps I'll just point out that Venus, in her lovely, friendly way, along with Jupiter, has come to oppose the moon of that of the 29th of April, 2024. So yeah, hopefully we get some kind of nurturance and love and something nice for the people, because the moon always represents the people in a collective. I'm sure I'm missing other things. If you have things that you want to add to this, do please go ahead and let me know in the comments down below what you're finding that I'm not seeing in the chart. Maybe one other thing, which is that now at this point in August, the North Node is at that point where Saturn would have got up to station retrograde in June, the end of June 2024. So that could be a very interesting point as well, that recalls the summer of 2024 and pulls it into the late summer of 2025. So you see how these cycles work. It's not a one-off thing. Don't sit around and say, oh, come on, nothing happened. These things don't make any sense. Astrology doesn't work. It's not as simple as that. And that's why you are invited to learn more about astrology, learn about your chart, and see how all of these things show up again and again in your own life. So that's it from me. Good night, everybody, or good morning, or hello, or whatever. And I will see you in the next couple of days with Jupiter in Gemini, which is, I think, a really great place to have it, since I have it myself. And I look forward to seeing you there. Bye bye.